Cool. Am I live? It's not showing me live on my end. I'm sorry, I can't have the thing playing in the background. I'm so sorry. One second, guys. Just having a bit of a technical issue. Let's just go to a pause screen for a second, if that's all right. Awesome. Apologies about that. I couldn't hear or see anything from backstage. It was just the music still playing at me, so we just had to get that sorted because it will be almost impossible to present if the music was still playing in my ears from the countdown. Apologies about that. Well, welcome to Normal Island Live. I'm Ben McLean, and tonight it is my absolute pleasure to be joined once again. It's been far too long, by the way, by the one and only Damien, aka Colonel Damo. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. You all right? I thought you were going to invite me on before long. I've got a brand new set and everything now. I'm almost as bland a studio as yours is.
I know. It's the white backgrounds, keeping the white backgrounds.
It's yeah. I was like, a nice white wall, be nice and shiny. I mean, but I won't. Well, I got a bit of reflection, but not too bad. It doesn't show up white at all when you're on camera. You said sort of a greyish, but it looks like I've got some colour in my cheeks for a change, though. So you know.
Yes, yeah. When you're as pale as I am, you really need the white background in order that people, I mean, people don't realise that I go outside at night and get moonburn instead of sunburn. When you're this pale, you have to make compensation. Right, we should probably get on with the show. So coming up tonight, Zack Polanski calls for the billionaire media's reign of terror to be ended with regulation. Dale Vince U-turns on North Sea oil extraction, and the media is implicitly lying to us about migrants and sex crimes. Remember to like the stream, make sure you're subscribed, and if you want to support us, then you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work. You can also become a YouTube member for just 99p, and don't forget to check out our Discord too. It's always good to be in there. People often have a chat in after the show in there. They'll often jump in a voice chat, and you don't have to, unmute. You can just be in the voice chat if you'd like to. Join in the discussion. I'm sure somebody can put a link to that in the chat. But let's go on to our first story. In the aftermath of the tragic death of Jason Arde, media reform has never been more important, and there is only one political party that seems willing to talk about it. Zack Polanski has set out his plans to take on the oligarchic media, which is severely needed. Polanski threw his weight behind the Media Sovereignty Act campaign in a speech at Green Gathering Festival in Chepstow, Wales, earlier this month. The petition promoted the Green Party of England and petition promoted, by the Green Party of England and Wales's leader, called on the government to pass a law to ban foreign and offshore ownership of UK media and enact a social media levy to distribute media ownership across society and fund independent, local and cooperative-owned media. It also backs new reforms to ensure all media in the UK are members of a statutory regulator, a call vociferously resisted by many publishers, and it would require think tanks to report who their funders are in real time. The campaign was founded by activist and former independent columnist Donica McCarthy. Turning his attention to the billionaire media, Zack criticised the billionaire media repeatedly, adding Britain needed a free press for a free country. Polanski told festival goers Donica McCarthy is publishing something called the Media Sovereignty Act as a petition. It's basically saying billionaires should not be able to have a monopoly on our free press. He added, we need to push independent media like Byline Times, Novara Media, and, oh, would you look at that, Turn Left. of course, it's really nice of Zach to give us a shout out. He didn't have to do that. He just did it because, he's lovely, and we really appreciate it. So if you're watching this at any point, Zach, thank you very much from all of us here at Turn Left. It means the world to us. Whilst the biggest issue that faces humanity is the climate catastrophe, nothing can be done with our current media. Media reform should be at the top of the agenda for anyone who is serious about changing this country. It's the reason why we exist, because the British media is one of the worst ecosystems in the world, in my opinion, worse than the US, as the last couple of weeks have rightly demonstrated. But of course, this has upset people on the right, believing that the breakup of the monopoly billionaire media is authoritarian. Toby Young said, Zack Polanski has called for the press to be sorted out, i.e., heavily censored in the wake of Jason Arday's death. But holding the powerful to account, including Polanski, is precisely what newspapers should be doing. I'm not sure that Zack Polanski counts as the powerful. But hey, we obviously have different opinions on that. The Free Speech Union, which was founded by Toby Young, said, and Zack Polanski has doubled down on his demands for greater press regulation. He also doesn't appear to have much time for debate or for people who hold opinions contrary to his own. I went on GB News a little while ago, and I was defending the position. Zack Polanski was sorry, just pausing for a second. Zack Polanski had challenged Nigel Farage to a debate directly. I think the idea that Zack doesn't have much time for debate is nonsensical. Anyway, sorry, continuing the graphic. Apologies for that. Freedom of the press is a central pillar of our democratic society. The fact that the leader of a mainstream British political party is speaking in such forceful and ominous terms about restricting our press should concern us all. The mask has slipped. This is a full-throated endorsement of censorship. It is authoritarian, plain and simple, so the Free Speech Union said. Now, John Stuart Mill's critics used to say of his writings on liberty that freedom was a lot like fire. It can be a negative or positive depending on the context. For example, what of Jason Arday's freedom of speech? Where was his right to be heard? Why object to tyranny.gov if you accept tyranny.com, which is a problem I think one could say of much of the rhetoric of the Free Speech Union, as it's called. The American, which calls itself an independent media organization, framed the story in a way that was rather telling. Green Party leader Zack Polanski has called for all media outlets to be state-approved. It's time we sorted out the press. Constant misinformation to protect their donors and fossil fuels is destroying lives and our planet. He has shared a petition that demands the government to introduce new regulatory reforms, including requiring all media in the UK to be members of a statutory regulator. Now, it's inaccurate to say that Zack is calling for all media outlets to be state-approved. This account is trying to make it sound like only certain media organizations... only certain media organizations can exist if the state allows them to, which is nonsense. The Telegraph, of course, didn't handle this particularly well either. Zack Polanski may be a clown, but he's also a threat to your freedom. Don't be fooled by the Green leader's imbecilic exterior. His war on right-wing misinformation reveals his true authoritarian nature. I, for one, am shocked that the corporate media opposes media regulation and the breakup of monopoly. Damien, it's true that there has been mass censorship from the government, people being arrested for holding signs, maybe, Palestine Action protesters. But there is also a need to deal with misinformation of the corporate media. What's your view on proposals and how such powers could be used?
Yeah, well, just quite notable a couple of the things that came up just then, especially the likes of Toby Young weighing in and his Free Speech Union. That tweet I found hilarious because it looked like it had just been printed off a chat GPT. There's so many AI tells in it. I can't say for sure if there was, but it says a lot when free speech is relying on AI to do the free speech bit for them. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Zack isn't calling for state ownership and state control of all media outlets. It's not become communism quite yet, but the fact is the media, or the mainstream media, has been allowed to mark its own homework for too bloody long. And I think the Jason Arday story that has dominated headlines here for ages, for weeks now, disgusting, says that lays that out completely. I mean, Young saying that the media needs to be there to hold the powerful to account, and you mentioned that Zack you don't think is necessarily the powerful. Well, Professor Jason Arnday was hardly a public figure here, was he? Why was he having to be held to account for anything? Especially when you compare what he is alleged to have done to another professor from there, William O'Reilly, I believe the name was. He was actually found guilty of it, but then he was white. So why didn't the Telegraph, which has been so infuriated over Professor Jason Arday, it's produced 43 of the 249 national media articles that have been out over the last 3 weeks about this guy. I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, how much is there to say about an allegation of plagiarism? I mean, how many articles does it take to say that? Does it really take 249 of them? Is this responsible media that we're experiencing here? Is this the so-called trusted media that we're all supposed to be, doffing our hats to and taking as read and everything they say? Because we've been here before, haven't we? I mean, you look at Hillsborough, you look at Caroline Flack, you look at the phone hacking scandal. How many times has the media now, or the mainstream media, been allowed to get away with marking its own homework, and has just been let off with a slap wrist again? All that's being asked for here is some proper regulation, because right now most of the, or I'll say most of, because it's not quite all, most of the mainstream media outlets out there are all signed up to IPSO, and people say, oh, IPSO's a regulator, and that's wonderful, but IPSO is a self-regulating body. It's by the mainstream media for the mainstream media. The Guardian is arguably worse, I would say, in some ways, because it's chosen not to be part of IPSO. It has its own system, and of course, they've played a particular part in the story with Professor Jason Arday. So when you look at the likes of yourselves at Turn Left, it's lovely of Zack to give you a boost there. I'm sure you will give him the free memberships later to give out. But myself as well, we're impress regulated, and it's the only actual regulator out there that is an independent regulator signed up to levels of compliancy. Why is it that we're having a conversation off the back of Keir Starmer leaving power, Andy Burnham having come into it now, where we've got this consultation going on to the end of this month? There's 12 days left to go for people to have their say in it, on this green paper that they want to bring forward about trusted sources and promoting them more heavily on social media and giving them a boost above other outlets because they're trusted. Well, what makes them trusted? How is trusted being measured? Because if trust is being measured by who is regulated, then they're not trustworthy because they're regulating themselves. Why should it not be Turn Left going to the top of the YouTube feed instead of, the Guardian or somebody else, or the BBC, for example? It's where's the measure of this going to be? So we need to have this conversation about how this goes ahead, what Zack is saying, how the regulation goes forward, and what shape that would take. But it's got to, at the most basic level, require some actual regulation when these outlets, these mainstream media outlets, which are so highly regarded, are not in fact properly regulated at all.
I don't know about you, but I find so much of the conversation about this so surface level. Like the sort of like anything the government does is tyranny, and anything the press does is freedom. And I find that really, really kind of like surface level analysis that if you just do the tiniest bit of thinking about, it all just falls apart. I was fortunate enough recently to be able to sit on a panel with Nima Akram, the founder of News Corps, and Sangeeta Maiska at the Media Democracy Festival. So I had to do a load of research on this stuff.
Sure.
And it was interesting what I sort of like came across, because the conversation goes so much deeper. When it comes to media regulation and the way to do it, there's obviously big problems with the way the current setup is. The current setup is almost exclusively based around shareholder value, and in the attention economy, whoever can create the most sensationalist stories will often be the ones who make the most money, because that's where the eyeballs go, and therefore that's where the money goes. That's where the advertising money goes. But there is a academic called Julia Cage. She's a French American academic who came up with a model that tries to deal with the idea of and balance the idea that the state needs to be involved to stop the oligarchs taking off with our media, but also the state recognizes that the state itself can be authoritarian. And the model she came up with is called a NPO, non-profit media organization. And basically the idea is the government creates the media organization, and there's two paths to donations. There's one path for large donors, and in return for large donations to the media media company, the donors get in return for large donations tax breaks, right? So it incentivizes those who, pay more money to, can pay large amounts of money to pay, and they get tax breaks. But what they don't get is voting rights. You only get voting rights from small donations, and those small donations are tracked so that the same people can't get extra voting rights, if that makes sense. And therefore, small donors get voting rights and a say over how the media shapes up. And I guess the question I'd ask is, why is the conversation about this so surface level when we've got these sorts of ideas that we could be discussing, right? Why is it so surface level? And why is the UK media so uniquely bad?
Yeah. Why is it so uniquely bad? I think a lot of it stems from how the media is cultivated, isn't it? I mean, you've got politicians and the media, they walk to hand in hand with each other, essentially. What you have very rich billionaire owners of a lot of these papers and these news groups, and of course the government will not tax the rich because they want to keep these media figures in their good, want to stay in their good books and the like. So obviously that's only one part of the whole dynamic between politics and big money, but it's one significant part of it, and it's why media regulation is fundamentally always been kicked back at, because at the end of the day, you've got very rich, very powerful people who can cause a lot of trouble for a government that they don't like, saying, well, no, I'm not going to back you if you go ahead with this. And so they don't, and it doesn't end up happening. But fundamentally, I mean, I rang off several instances a moment ago of the kind of disasters we've had in the press. Professor Jason Arday is just the latest example of why media as a whole cannot be left to not be regulated. It's mad that, frankly, it's still in this day and age is not regulated. It absolutely has to come in some way, shape, or form to stop instances like this going on. How many more people have got to be driven out of their minds with this? How many times have the media got to be told this is what's going to happen? How many more examples are they going to be able to look back on saying, oh, we should have learned lessons from this? Because it never happens. You can end up with somebody else come in a position of power at a given paper, or a new owner comes in. And the talk of oligarchs is very interesting, given how many of them own newspaper interests in this country as well. And in the end, you just don't get anywhere. Nothing ends up actually changing. There's a few we promise we'll do better, and then it's just swept under the table until the next big media scandal blows up in their faces again. But how many more times is it going to be allowed to carry on like this? It's going round and round in circles, and it's harmful.
It reminds me in that way a little bit of the just a tiny bit of the firearms debate in America, the debate around Second Amendment. It's like that there is it obviously needs to be overhauled, but there's sort of like a lack of political will, even though I think there's a will among the general population. Like, the general population are not keen on the press. But we are, of course, going to return to the press with the last story. So we'll leave that one there and go on to our second story, shall we? Superb. And actually, it all kind of links back. So on to the second story. Dale Vince, the co-entrepreneur, shocked the BBC's Faisal Islam last night after not opposing the drilling of North Sea oil.
You might be losing this argument on Jackdaw, at least as regards to gas.
Yeah, well, I'm not convinced, actually, and it will still have to gain planning consent, as you mentioned at the top of the show. But look, I have a different position, perhaps, than the one you expect me to have. There's a way that we can make sense of this North Sea puzzle. We can actually bring our bills down, which we we can't at the moment unless we do this one thing, which is price control the North Sea. At the moment, the global market sets the price, and it doesn't matter how much we make here, we pay the global price. If we price control it like we have our retail energy sector, we can actually save money, and that makes more sense of the North Sea, and it would make more sense of Jackdaw and Rosebank.
Oh, right. So, I mean, have you changed your position? Because it did appear that you were against it fairly recently, entirely on the reopening of oil and gas from your social media.
The way things are and the way things have been, it doesn't make sense. The argument that we can save money by drilling is nonsense. And what President Trump just said on your show, by the way, is just the height of stupidity. The North Sea is not one of the biggest finds. It might have been 60 years ago. Now it's got barely anything left. But that's a slight digression. If we price control wholesale energy across the board, like we have retail, we have to do this to reform our energy system. If we do that, we pave the way to make sense of Rosebank and Jackdaw, new drilling, sites that are already licensed, because we can save money. And then this secondary argument that's being made for new drilling, that if we're going to use fossil fuels, we might as well make them here as to bring them from abroad. That makes more sense and comes to the fore. We will use fossil fuels for a number of years to come, and it makes sense to make them here if we can also save money here and create some jobs. I'm up for it.
Well, you have clearly changed your position in the past few. This is interesting. We're getting news here from you, Dale Vince, today, because you were definitely against the expansion of these two fields.
There's something to be said about being practical about the climate crisis. Like, I don't support the idea of banning nuclear energy, for example. I think that's a good temporary alternative until we transition to renewables. Drilling for oil and opening new oil fields that's a different matter altogether. And Vince is an eco warrior, if you like, in favour of drilling. That seems remarkable, especially when only 2 months ago he called it a betrayal. Excuse me, one second. The green energy tycoon who just months ago said the new North Sea drilling would be a betrayal if given the green light by the government. Vince in an Instagram post further explained his position. Labour's manifesto pledge is no new licences. Rosebank and Jackdaw have a licence and they fall into the new drilling category. While I think new licences would be a breach of Labour's manifesto pledge and arguably a betrayal for a lot of people attracted to that pledge, Rosebank and Jackdaw are licensed. They make no sense to me in the current situation, but if we price control our own oil and gas, they start to make some more sense. Even then, bear in mind, they would only be they would be only very small contributors to our national need. What this kind of reads, or you could kind of read this as a defence of Labour and saying, well, Labour didn't promise to open to stop Rosebank and Jackdaw because it was about licences in their manifesto, therefore it's okay. But doesn't that kind of feel like party politics? Vince is supposed to be an independent voice, not a cabinet member with collective responsibility. He has the freedom to criticise whichever policy he pleases instead of towing the party line. It's worth pointing out that in the 2024 general election, Vince backs Labour and not the Greens. If you're thinking that this was purely a tactical choice to stop the Tories winning, then why did Vince specifically back Labour in Bristol when Carla Denyer, who was then co-leader of the Greens, was ahead in the polls? Surely from a tactical perspective, he would have backed Labour nationally, but thrown his weight behind Carla to get more Green voices into Parliament. It's also worth mentioning that Vince is a major Labour donor and has given the party £6 million since 2024, with £5 million of that sum given for the election. Given that the Greens quadrupled their seats at the last election and have become more popular under Zack Polanski, wouldn't it make sense that he would donate to the Greens and to help grow their presence? In a way, it's sort of an appeal that I would make is, hey, you've got a really successful and insurgent Green movement here. Why would you not be backing it? I'm also skeptical of the claim that we can continue drilling to reduce bills. The amount of, at least in the long term, the amount of oil from those licenses are tiny compared to the global market. Without the government nationalising energy, That's not really a long-term mechanism to control prices. If energy prices were so important to Vince, really the thing he needs to be doing is calling for nationalisation. In terms of jobs for Jackdaw, the amount of jobs that will be created for this license is a whopping 27, not 27,000, 27. I have more to say on this, certainly, but Damien, I'll come to you if you don't mind. Is Vince being smart and pragmatic, or is he taking a much more Labour partisan approach?
He's a poster boy for Labour. There's no other way of reading it. I mean, as you said there, he's towing the party line. He's extolling the virtues of the manifesto when he's not in an elected post and is under no obligation to do so whatsoever. And he's backed Labour over the Greens, even in areas where the Greens were set to win. This is a Labour figure. This is a major Labour donor. And he's talking about lowering bills, but you've given every reason for why that's a nonsense argument, quite frankly, because oil is sold under a global market. Without renationalization, you're never going to have control over energy prices, which the energy companies have got no reason whatsoever to pass on to consumers. They're not made to whatsoever. This is production end of the oil market, and the oil regulator only covers the consumer end of that. So it's not touched in any way, shape, or form. But it's the fact that this guy sells himself as this eco tycoon, or the media sells him as this eco tycoon. I don't know if Dale has not noticed or anything, but we have been burnt to a crisp in this country for 2 months now. We are set to have something like our sixth heat wave at the end of this month going into September. We've had drought. We have had wildfires. You've had the Forest of Dean literally smoking from the ground. We've had gorse fires down here in Cornwall. The infrastructure's you've had tracks buckling, for example, under the temperatures. The country is never built for temperatures like this. So the answer can never be to reopen new fossil fuel fields, whether they're licensed already or not, as Dale has put it. But they haven't been drilled yet. They need to be drilled. And you can somehow still say, well, this is sensible environmentalism, because it's backwards. Rosebank and Jackdaw are not going to become climate safe just because they already hold licenses. You know, the atmosphere hasn't taken account of that CO2 yet. There will be more warming as a result of it. But, you know, no extraction should be going on in this day and age, not when we know the seriousness of climate change. We know there's a human element to it, regardless of how much of that you may or may not believe in. It's still happening, and therefore it's incumbent upon us to try and mitigate that as best we can, even if you don't believe that it's necessarily as man-made as some outlets or some politicians or whoever may make it out to be. But his argument that, you know, price controls can make North Sea production work for British bill payers, as you say, it's for the birds. And without renationalisation, that can never happen, and that's never going to happen under a Labour government. And I don't know how that would affect Dale's business itself if he did suddenly find ecotricity on the renationalisation end of the scale. And as for the jobs, you said the figures yourself. There's 27 jobs there. Well, big deal. That's not going to create a lot, is it? Well, I mean, because so much of this process is automated these days, there's hardly any new workers needed in these things. So to me, it just doesn't smack of genuine belief. It smacks of towing a Labour line to me. And it's very disappointing coming from somebody with Vince's profile that this is the road he's chosen to go down on this, because it's mad.
I think Dale Vince is good on stuff like Palestine, and that is good to see. Like, I appreciate that he was on there, and he's always wearing a keffiyeh. Like, I appreciate that. But I can't see eye to eye with him on this, because I think he's lost sight of the long term, right? I think his focus is on the short term, and not some of the more damaging things that could happen. Now, he was about half an hour before we went live on the show, he was on Novara, being interviewed by Michael, and I wanted to respond to like a few of the things he said. So first of all, he did lay out the argument on exactly how the price control situation would work. It would be done through what's called a contract for difference, which is basically the oil companies, the extractors, enter an agreement with the government, which says it's a contract called a contract for difference. And basically they agree a strike price per barrel or litre or whatever of oil. And if the prices fall below that strike price, the government will top up the difference. They'll make up the difference. But if the prices go above that strike price, then the company will pay the excess, the money above that strike price, to the government. And as far as I can tell, Dale's suggestion is you then use that money to offset consumer prices, and presumably, if we're being generous with Dale, I think he's saying that you'd invest that into green energy products and green energy. But the thing is a Green New Deal and investment in wind and solar would lower consumer prices as well. It would lower consumer prices and give you all of those things, but it would also reset the economic consensus. I think even if it's successful, there's a lot of criticisms that one could make on a political level. On Novara, Dale Vince was saying, when the political stuff was brought up, he was saying that essentially the Tories imposed price caps, and so through on energy, so we can do it. And it's like, yeah, but even if those price caps are successful, there's three sort of major problems, or three problems that I would bring up. One, dependence on oil and gas, on fossil fuels itself, is a security issue for Britain right now. We've seen that with the Strait of Hormuz and the way that it's affected prices in this country. Now, we can't fully insulate ourselves from that, because global shipping is not decided by the type of energy that we use here in Britain. But the less dependent we are on fossil fuels, surely the more insulated we are from whatever nonsense Donald Trump is up to, or whatever economic restrictions that Russia wants to impose on us through restrictions on liquid natural gas. And that goes for anywhere in the world, not just Russia and the US, but anywhere in the world. Saudi Arabia that wants to put political pressure on us. It's a security issue. But secondly, we have world leading offshore wind farms. We are a world leader in offshore wind farms. It seems silly to make all of this about trying to control prices through oil regulation and through what they call contracts for difference, when we could simply expand our use of offshore wind farms and pump loads more into that. A green industrial revolution. There's so much to be a Green New Deal, Green Industrial Revolution, whatever you want to call it. But the third point is, with the long term, we're probably going to end up with a reform government in the next few years. Let's assume worst case scenario, reform government by about 2029. That's 3 years roughly. And assuming that the Burnham government lasts that long, and it's looking pretty strong at the moment. Now, that is just about long enough to mothball oil fields, so to take away the things that they need to get going again very quickly. And the mothballing of an oil field is not closing it down completely, because closing it down completely takes literal decades. But it would slow them up enough that it wouldn't be so tempting for Reform and their donors, fossil fuel donors, to attempt to reopen those oil fields, because it would take a lot more time and a lot more money, and therefore you reset the incentives for those energy companies into green industrial revolution. And assuming that it would take years to restart, it would stop Reform just removing the price caps if they take power in 2029. The problem with Dale's plan is that it's very easy for Reform to just switch it back to the old system when they take power. We've got to be thinking longer term than that. We've got to be thinking into the future. We've got to be thinking not just about what this government is doing, but how will what this government does affect what the next government will do. I don't know if that made any sense to you, Damien. Do you see where I'm coming from?
I do see where you're coming from. The one question that popped into my head when you started your explanation there, the strike prices, who sets them?
I believe they're agreed between the government and the corporation, but that's, if you're about to say what I think you're going to say.
You know where I'm going with energy prices,
Yes.
and caps there.
Yes.
Yeah, these things with caps is they don't tend to stay capped at a certain level for very long. They tend to move. And the other side of that equation is we got to be, as you say, we got to think about this now. We've got an opportunity at this point to head Reform off if we want to, but unfortunately you've got a government that's taking how much from oil and fossil fuel lobbyists at the moment, because they can always be bought. Our politicians are always for sale, and unfortunately that's, I think, is largely what we're seeing here. You make perfectly valid points when it comes to renewables. We're an island, for heaven's sake. We've got an awful lot of wind. It's all blowing across from Donald Trump, or the United States, if you prefer. But again, our weather comes from that direction. So we have all that wind. We're an island. I've never understood why we don't have more investment in tidal. Because, I mean, the wind might stop, but the tide never does. As long as we've got a moon, it never will. So, there's all manner of things that we should be investing in that would have more long-termism, that would have more energy security, given what Trump is doing over in the Strait of Hormuz right now, which has really exposed how vulnerable we are to fluctuations in the oil market and the gas market and all other manners of markets as well. I mean, the other one is helium, for example. You can't have a party balloon; it all comes out of Qatar. I don't know if you knew that one, but there you go. It's a byproduct of LNG. But yeah, it's if the shipping's not moving, the products aren't coming out. When our energy infrastructure is so reliant on that, because our politicians have been bought and paid for by oil lobbyists for so long, then nothing ever changes. And nothing's going to change this time either. As much as you've made a perfect case for Andy Burnham, who could be listening right now and thinking, right, I need to not do this. I need to put up bigger windmills. It won't happen. He will not do it. And he will leave that door open for reform. Labour are just as big an enablers of a reform government now as they were when Keir Starmer left. Andy Burnham might be enjoying a bit of a bounce at this moment in time, this little honeymoon period of his. I still find it inexplicable because he's by and large not done anything different. He's just thrown a couple of sweeteners in for this, that, for, bus fares and the like, which is good. But in the grand scheme of things, that's small potatoes when he's just carrying on with all the big bad stuff that Starmer was bringing in before. And this is a classic example of
that. I hope that Dale wouldn't take this with any sort of disrespect, but I do think that because I think he takes some good positions, but I do think that his thinking in this is very liberal. It's very affected by this sort of liberal belief that you don't deal with underlying conditions, you don't deal with the systemic problems, and talk about ownership and incentives and all of these sorts of things, but you just try and just manipulate it from above and just hope that solves the problem. And that's not how it works, because like you say, the strike price, if it's a government paid by the oil industry negotiating with the oil industry, well, it's very clear who's going to set that.
We all know it. We've seen it all before. We know the cap will rise when it's convenient for the corporations and the government taking their thank you very much, Mr. Capitalist. I'll take my cut, thank you, as a donation. For staffing, obviously, we know how they do it. But, it'll just happen again, just as it's happening with, electricity and gas prices domestically. It's not a system that works. It is a system that exploits us, that we have no choice in. And, until people start voting for renationalization for a party that'll actually do it and isn't going to sell out every time like every establishment party always does, the uniparty, Labour, Conservatives and Reform, because they're not any different. They're full of old Tories, as we know. You've got to choose differently, and it's cutting through. It's a media messaging as well. I mean, again, we come back to the first story, I suppose, in a way, that if we don't have properly regulated media, you're not going to get informed in the way people need to be informed, and the wool will continue to be pulled over people's eyes, and too many people in the country will think Nigel Farage is the coming of the next Messiah, and they're going to vote for him accordingly and lose their pip, and a wall will get built around Dover. I don't know, but that sort of thing.
Yes, we're in for some quite extraordinary times, it's got to be said. If they build a wall around Clacton, maybe we should arrange for a lid to be put on the wall as well. Okay, let's move on. But before we do, it's 2026, and we really want this year to be big for Turn Left. We want to be more ambitious than last year and to really put us on the map. We're leveling up. We have a part-time studio with guests in person, but we want to officially have our own space, and for our contributors, of course, to be paid for the work that we do. Your support over the years has been amazing, and we are ready to take this to the next level. We do rely on small donations, so if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can make a one-off donation or support us monthly on Patreon. And of course, you can here become a YouTube member for just 99p. This all doing the readout. It all feels very topical with what we're doing today. Every story seems to link back to the media, and there's so many problems with the UK media. And with that, let's go on to our final story. A new study has found that people widely overestimate the amount of sex crimes committed by foreign nationals. Believe us, we're not shocked about this fact, but it is a myth that has permeated across society. A myth it is indeed. The British public believes foreign nationals are responsible for twice the number of sexual offences that they actually commit, a study has suggested. New research on public perceptions of crime found the public guessed foreign nationals make up twice the number of sexual offenders than official statistics show, 30% compared to 15%. They also estimated foreign nationals make up 25% of the prison population, when in fact they make up just 15%. Back in 2022, the Financial Times' John Byrne Murdoch found an interesting statistic. New for this week's column, I dug into the curious case of British attitudes to immigration. Before the EU referendum, concern about immigration tracked levels of arrivals. Since then, immigration has kept rising, but concerns have evaporated. What's going on? Now, lower down the thread, Murdoch provides an explanation which none of you will find particularly surprising. And this is where the picture grows a little more ominous for us liberals. Public concern may have tracked immigration levels relatively well pre-referendum, but it tracked tabloid coverage, the Daily Mail, even better, and has continued to track it post-referendum. You see, British people's attitudes are largely based, it seems, on how many times the media covers immigrants, not the amount of people coming here. Now, I just want to be very clear at this point. This isn't because British people are stupid. If the information that you're being fed is corrupted and biased, then you have no other way of getting that information. Most people switch on the news to get their news. They don't think about the biases that news comes with, and how it might be trying to sway them politically. I always say you're never too smart to fall for propaganda, and any time that you think you are too smart to fall for propaganda, you need to check yourself over, make sure that you're properly scrutinizing the things that you're seeing and reading, and that you're scrutinizing your own perspective and the biases in your own perspective, and the systemic privileges that you might have when it comes to reading media. Media analysis is unfortunately a constant struggle. Now, of course, the things Murdoch was referring to there were back in 2022 when the Financial Times tracked the Daily Mail. Since then, GB News, among others, Talk TV and others, have become more prominent, and the debate surrounding immigration has become even more right-wing. Damien, none of us are surprised at this story, but it's not good enough to simply explain that attitudes have changed due to propaganda. We all know that. The question is, what can we do about it?
Well, indeed, you're straight back to question number one, aren't we? It's media reform again, isn't it? If the media's driven this for years now, and it's all gone along, broadly speaking, in line with Nigel Farage because they love him, because he makes bank, he's cash every time they get him on there. It's ratings and all that sort of thing. So obviously, whenever he just comes on, he starts bleating about migration or immigrants or asylum seekers, and he'll be stood on the cliffs of Dover and he'll be pointing at small boats or trying to, squinting in the background to see if he can spot one, as if he's some sort of depraved version of Captain Mannering defending the beaches. It's people have, I think, got tired of it, a lot of it, for hearing nothing but people bleating about immigration reform, basically standing on a platform of nothing other than migration. Although I think it's taken a little bit of a turn. I think as much as propaganda can absolutely fool anybody, I think the propaganda has sort of worn itself thin, either because people have just got sick of having years of this nonsense handed to them. We've got all this migration coming over in small boats when it's like 5% of the grand total. But they certainly seem to be set on picking on PIP claimants right now and targeting the disabled by saying they want to scrap that if they get into power. And now it just seems like, well, they just jumped from one demographic that they feel they can punch down on and get away with it and win votes over to another. And it just seems to be their stock in trade. They don't actually have anything to stand for. And now they're just moving on to the next culture war as they see it. Immigration's fallen sharply as well. I think net migration's down to 171,000 from 331,000 in the last year, and that's below the peak in 2023. So people, as much as we can say the media have driven this nonsense over migration and the level of it and the impact of it, and they're coming over here to steal our jobs and snatch our carrots and kill the firstborn and what have you else that they might try to sell us through the media. The media is also cut through, or the media that matters, who has carried the right stories, have cut through and said, the numbers have come down, yet the political narrative of that has not. So maybe the immigration panic is fooling fewer people, and this is why reform is suddenly pivoting. I would like to think this is why they've had to pivot. I don't much like the direction they've gone in as a carer, but it speaks volumes about what that party is all about, and I think hopefully people might start to see through that a bit. But ultimately, when it comes to this story and it comes to propaganda, so much of it is promoted in mainstream media outlets. And if there was proper regulation, they wouldn't get away with it. They'd be held to account to it. People would be able to report them to the regulator for it. And there would be consequences for that. They would have to do something like that. You or I, if we said something false and we were reported to in press about it, we would have to issue corrections. There is nothing forcing these outlets to do it. Absolutely nothing, because Ipso is more likely to give them a slap on the wrist and say, there, don't do it again, you naughty boy. It's not the same impact. And when they're so much bigger and so much more powerful and have so much more reach than we do, there's something seriously wrong in this country without it. So again, we've come full circle today.
Absolutely. But of course, I fully agree. I also think there's something worth bringing up, which is so much of right-wing feeling and right-wing sort of political movement is sort of centered in sexual insecurity. Like, sexual insecurity, I think, has a lot to do with it, and it's about control as well. It's about sexual insecurity and control, and I think there's a big question here, which is why sex crimes. It's always sex crimes. Like, by the way, it also was in Nazi Germany. The Der Stürmer, Julius Streicher's Nazi magazine in the 1930s, used to love printing like what the historian Richard Evans described as borderline pornographic depictions of Jewish men assaulting German Aryan girls, white German girls. So the far right's always had this kind of obsession with the foreigner, the other, coming here to assault women in this country, and the whole protect our women and girls thing. What's your sort of read on that, and how that sort of how and why that sort of has manifested in the way it has?
Well, sexual offences and all crimes of that nature obviously need to be taken seriously. But as we started at the beginning, the figures with relation to migration and sexual offences have been overblown. Now, there's propaganda, therefore. So it's the latest angle, if you like, that is being weaponised in order to bring migration and asylum seekers and whoever else back into the frame again, back into the story, to try and basically say, right, okay, this is what they're doing now. It's not enough that they're coming over here and stealing our jobs. They're doing this to our women now. Look at these grooming gangs here. And of course, the only grooming gangs over here on the news will be the one where the people are all brown. Never mind the fact that most grooming gangs are run by people who are very much white. And we know that because the facts are there, but they don't get reported. Yada, yada, yada. We're back to the media again. So what do we do about it? I mean, obviously it's got to be called out. It's got to be reported. But who do we report it to? Because they're not regulated. We can argue it with Ipso, but you're only going to get the editor of such and such a newspaper basically having his turn in the hot seat to do the regulation bit, and he'll look at his colleague at such and such a paper and think, okay, well, you've been a bit naughty about that. That wasn't very good. We will send you a strongly worded letter and tell you not to do it again. But that's as far as it goes. There's never any consequences. Where's the fine? Where's the punishment? Where's the consequence? When you've scapegoated an entire demographic who have fled God knows what. I don't want to listen to people saying they should have stayed in France or wish they'd drowned in the damn channel because, frankly, you're pond scum. It's nothing to do with that. They've escaped war, they've escaped persecution, they've escaped famine. We were talking about climate change here. We're moaning about how hot it is here. Try living in North Africa or something like that right now. You know, if this carries on, we're going to have more people like that.
Well, it's not just that.
Milder climes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that. It's also that in a world where climate change is coming on faster than we expected, Britain's climate is due to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, and then rapidly get colder and colder and colder and colder because of the changes in world jet streams and the particular weather that we were likely to get if the climate continues to change as it is. It's very plausible in the near future that people in this country will have to rely on the kindness of strangers in maybe not other countries as far away as France, but simply other countries like people in England relying on the kindness of people in Wales or Scotland where there's more land and houses can be rebuilt or there are cooler climates so they suffer less wildfires. And if you get treated if you treat migrants that way, expect that treatment to be reciprocated upon you if you are internally or externally displaced from your country. It's just the reality that's coming to bite us very, very soon. We tend to think of ourselves as immune to the to becoming refugees or forced migration. I'm afraid that history is about to leave us very, very quickly, particularly with the incoming of food shortages, wildfires, all of that sort of thing. And a lot of it, by the way, I always like to say this, a lot of it comes down to your understanding of what is your problem with a migrant rapist. Is your problem with a migrant rapist the fact that they are a rapist? Because then I could agree with you. But if your problem is with the fact that they are a migrant, then I disagree with you. A migrant rapist is no worse than a nationally born rapist. A rapist is bad because they are a rapist, not because they are a migrant. And if you can understand the fundamental difference between those two things, I think you can understand the left-wing position.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're quite right. I mean, I was just thinking to myself, well, if it's going to get as bad as you were just saying, I'm going to trade on that Swedish ancestry of mine and I'm off. But too remote. But it's you make perfectly valid points. So you get areas of the country that have been a little bit better off. I mean, my brother-in-law lives in Scotland. He's had nothing but rain. He's been quite miserable about all the fact that we've had wall-to-wall sunshine here in Cornwall, even though my garden is now growing hay rather than grass. But so much the case for the rest of the country too. And of course, you mentioned Wales, but South Wales has had horrendous fires. So it's not necessarily the safe refuge.
True.
We're a small island. You know, our climate, we're very spoilt climatically because we have this jet stream which keeps us warmer than we should be at our latitude. We're on a par with Newfoundland and areas like that. Bit chilly. So it could get a lot worse if as you said, it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. For now, you'll have this. I can't remember what the oscillation is. This bit of cold water that the jet stream sort of keeps there near Iceland. And once that's gone, then that's it. We're in deep freeze. Then we're going to end up more like Scandinavia. But in the meantime, we go through horrendous crop shortages. Farmers are struggling right now to produce enough food, so there's going to be food shortages going through this winter. They're already using winter feed for their animals. What are they going to use in the winter, in which case, because they're robbing Peter to pay Paul and they know it, well, what help is there going to be for them now? Oh, there's no more EU subsidies or anything like that. Oh, it's Nigel Farage again, wasn't it? Yes, and every one of our stories tonight has sort of bounced off the other. It's less gone full circle, and we've more like got a spider's web at this point.
Absolutely. They're all sort of linked. And so perhaps we should go to the comments section and bring in our producer for this evening. Curtis, how are you doing?
Hello. Fantastic show. I just want to say thank you, Ben, for stepping in for me. I was feeling under the weather. And I think when you're producing, it's a bit more chill than hosting.
Absolutely.
So I'm sat back,
But
wonderful show.
You were just having a bad hair day.
Do you know what? I'm in severe need of a haircut now. I've been growing it out, but it's too long. and it is a bad headache. So that's probably why I
I'm only
pretended I'm
jealous,
ill.
don't worry about it.
Called out.
But you know what? Fantastic show, and good to see you back on, Damien. It's been too long.
It has been a while, hasn't it?
I'm really liking the IRL, like the real background, and not the green screen
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
We've upgraded.
It's nice. I don't have that green halo around my head anymore. I'm not like the Hulk out. So, you know, it's quite nice. It's quite swish, although I do tend to get a little co-star now and again. Little fuzzy
Lovely.
one in the background, but cats, but they haven't shown up today.
Sorry, I thought I'd missed something major about your background, because I thought Curtis said your IRA background, and I was like, what IRA background? What? Hang on a second. Should we?
I said IRL, but you know, Ben's been thinking about the IRA too much, actually.
Apologies.
Unfortunately.
Part Irish is always on my mind. Anyway, let's go to the comments.
Sorry, he's been racist to himself. So, let's start with the super chats. We've got Len McBain, who disappeared for a while and has come back. We saw him in the last show. Saw you loitering in Navarra's chat as well. Gifted 10 Turn Left memberships. Thank you for your generosity. It really means a lot. Labour Friends Genocide. I feel like we have, we're obliged to comment on your name every single time it comes up, but it's a great name because it's so accurate. With a Turn Left membership. KT Marshall, go check out KT Marshall streams. 10 Turn Left memberships. That's again really, really generous. Thank you so much. Lemon Bain back again with a super chat, £2. Only one media outlet approved by Ben and Len. To be fair, I think you're right. You should just only outlets approved for yourself and Len. Still trying to decide if they're the same person, but one or two people. Just approve Turn Left, and that's it. We'll be the entire ecosystem. Steve81, very generous as well. Gifted 10 Turn Left memberships. You've been very generous tonight. Really appreciate. Specs Bean Farmer with 5 Turn Left memberships. Is it payday for people?
Wow. Amazing.
Don't knock it.
And then Labour Friends of Genocide is back with another Turn Left membership. And a £2 super chat that says, Damo will pass on your message, not optimistic. I can't really remember what that was about now, but appreciate the super chats.
I'm full of sage sayings. I could be anything at this point.
Could be anything. Agent 47 LFC. I was looking at the chats, by the way, and I believe Agent 47 is a new viewer, so welcome. Also, I'm assuming LFC means Liverpool Football Club, so well done to you then. That's two thumbs up for me.
Can't be right about everything.
And well, he did give a 5 Turn Left membership, so I bet you take that back, you know?
Yeah, I'll take that back. Okay, cool. My principles can be sold. I'm like a government agent. Just pay us, and I'll say anything.
It's like Nigel Farage on Cameo.
I know, right?
Exactly. Well, you said the IRA stuff.
Yeah, I know.
As well, so
the IRA.
Make a lot. It's actually Ben using a Farage AI and then collecting the money off Cameo, which is very smart. Which we can put into our ecosystem. You should be doing that. Michael says, in response to you talking about Discord, Curtis even posts in Discord. If a boomer can do it, so can you. I'm like the youngest boomer. I did just turn 33, but for some reason, when it comes to certain technology, or a lot of technology, actually, I'm a boomer, which is odd. I've always been surrounded by technology. I can do like video editing and stuff.
Then you stop being able to do it. I used to be able to program a VHS, no problem. And then all went wrong after that. So.
And that is really showing your boomerism. You're like, I used to program a VHS.
I'm Gen X, most of them.
Actual Intrepids, allowing the media to regulate themselves is clearly not working. This is kind of what we have. I mean, I'm going to bring it up again because I'm still so outstanded by Dan Needle's comments on Twitter when he said that I find it strange that the left are calling for more regulation in the press because the media uses regulation to go after their critics. And I'm like, what media regulation? Okay, we've got Ofcom and Ipso, 2 regulators that are fucking terrible. And if that's the case, then why is the media owned by the very powerful? Because they're buying up the media to push their own narrative. Regulation isn't the issue; it's ownership. If look, if regulation was an issue, you would have had Ofcom, take GB News, maybe even off air. It's the fact that regulation isn't very good. So Dan Needle, I still can't get over that point he made because it was so fucking stupid.
And
Indefinite
the other,
article.
if I can add something
Sorry,
there, if I can add something
please
just
do.
there, yeah. IPSO, you have to realise, means that the people who are subscribed, who are regulated by IPSO, they basically signed up to what the editor's code. That's the clue in the name. The editors are the regulators. The editors of each of the papers, the titles that are all signed up to it, they are the regulators. So they are marking themselves homework. And Ofcom is just a non-ministerial government department. So it just means, the cabinet office run it, basically.
And then when it comes
not
to
regulation.
when it comes to Impress, which a lot of leftist organizations from Navarra to, I mean, yourself is Impress, the Canary, that's all like voluntary. So, and it's good to make sure that you're held accountable. But the idea that regulation is a problem, well, you've got Impress, which is voluntary, and then you've got IPSO and Ofcom, which is utterly weak. So, yeah, the problem is not regulation. And I think part of talk about sort of Zack intervening, a lot of the media discussion has been around regulation. You've got the Free Speech Union talking about draconian measures and authoritarianism, right? That was literally half of the conversation. The other half of the conversation, which didn't get talked about, was the fact that he wanted, and this document wants to break up the media and hand power to communities and smaller organizations. So they'll talk about authoritarianism when it comes to like regulation, but completely misses the point when actually it's more democratic when you have more media plurality. The problem with our media is the monopolization of it all. And Ben, your great meme where you brought it to life anyway of tyranny.com versus tyranny.gov.
Oh yes,
it's a brilliant thing that libertarians don't understand, and Toby Young doesn't understand. They don't fundamentally understand power. I mean, his comment about Zack Polanski being part of the cohort of powerful that needs to be held accountable. That's a crazy thing. And I think when it comes to Toby Young and many journalists in the mainstream media, in their heads, it's elected politician automatically more powerful than the rest of us. So I wonder if Toby Young thinks a local councillor has more power over him because they're technically in the electoral political process, which is crazy to me. Zack Polanski is a leader of a big national party. Of course, he has some level of power, absolutely. But I would argue that maybe Toby Young and other corporate media journalists who've worked in the media their entire lives, who are schmoozed with high-level politicians and those who are well-connected, have far more power. I mean, Toby Young or other people can put out media pieces, and that can circulate across the country. Zack Polanski can't do it. In fact, he relies on media like us. So these people don't understand power because they just think government is the end-all and be-all of power, which is why I'm not surprised he thinks Zack Polanski automatically has so much power being an elected politician. But ultimately, power doesn't reside in governments or corporations. Power relies in power. At the moment, the government has a lot of power and it's using it for ill effects when it comes to the Palestine Action prescription. And of course, when it comes to corporate power, but the right wing and libertarians, again, they want to be slaves to corporate power. They hate regulation, and think that government is doing tyranny. The government does do tyranny, but does everyone forget about corporate tyranny too and corporate censorship? We've had J.R. Edwards from TikTok. He briefly had his account removed. It's now back up. We've had an Irish comedian, pro-Palestinian comedian. I'm sorry, I forget his name. Has had his YouTube channel removed. Yes, exactly. Megan Ruth, who came on our show, her YouTube channel was removed, and her channel was, I mean, I hope I don't get it wrong, was around 20,000 subscribers.
25, I think. Yeah,
it's 25,000, which isn't small, but it's not, millions, and that's quite worrying. In fact, we have more subscribers, which makes me think, oh my God, can we be shut down at any time? But of course, the right wing don't matter. The right wing don't care about that, nor do they care about the fact that like grannies are being arrested. So clearly shows how much they care about tyranny. What do you guys think about the right wing response and the fact that they only care about tyranny when it's government .gov, not .com?
Well, they're the biggest snowflakes going, aren't they? I mean, if there's a possible slight that they can be offended by, they will be absolutely more offended than anybody else possibly could. And don't you dare hold them to account over it either, because otherwise they'll throw a strop and walk off. And we've seen Farage do that quite recently, haven't we? He doesn't like being asked about his 5 million quid. Well, too bad. He's going to be asked about it again because sadly the bin didn't beat him. But it's the consolation prize. He's back in the frame for that again. But yeah, you're absolutely right in what you're saying there. I don't disagree with it at all.
I agree, but also they're just not serious about solving the problem. Like there are serious ways that you can restrict, as I mentioned with Julia Cage before earlier in the show. There are serious ways that you can restrict the power of the state to monopolize and control media, whilst also making sure that that media doesn't become the playthings of oligarchs. There is a ground to be struck there, between those 2 points. But Toby Young, the Free Speech Union, they're not interested in having that discussion, because their only analysis of power is basically just, well, is it the state or is it not the state? If it's not the state, it's freedom. If it's the state, then it's tyranny. It's just such a dim way of viewing the world, and it really needs to be. I contrast Toby Young with somebody from the Media Reform Coalition or the IMA, like Tom Chivers. If anybody's interested in learning about media reform, particularly reform of the BBC, and what could be being done there, go and check out Tom Chivers from the IMA, who does plenty. Media Reform Coalition, MRC, who does plenty of work on this sort of thing. I believe he's. I can't remember his title exactly, but he's. I think something like Deputy Director of the Media Reform Coalition, if I remember off the top of my head. But he's thought about this so much more than any of the people like Toby Young or any of these people who are very, very loud on Twitter, and mistake that for balanced and fair media reporting, as though everybody has the same voice as they do by compliance with the right-wing press. It's just not the case, and we really need to have a look at the way we view this. Sorry, go on.
And let's be completely honest here. Why do the right wing not favour some kind of accountability or mechanisms to do something about misinformation? Is because the right wing politics coincides with the oligarchy. So the core tenets of left wing politics is economic inequality. Most of us are anti-capitalists, and we don't like oligarchs. And who are the tech bros? Well, they're obviously big capitalists. They're the oligarchs. They're the billionaires, right? Versus the right wing, who fight everything on culture wars, or even when it comes to economic policy. Their economic policy is deregulation and tax cuts. So there is a bias here in which right wing politics coincides with big business and big tech. Therefore, they're going to get promoted in the algorithms, which they do. Many studies show that right-wing content gets pushed. Why? Just think of it from a logical level, from a capitalist point of view. If you're a capitalist who owns a big tech firm or a social media platform, are you going to want to boost creators that are going to not call you out or protect your how your business operates and then the profits? Or are you going to boost creators who severely criticize you, power structures, and either want billionaires to not exist or severely tax these people? You're not going to do that. So of course the right wing don't care about government regulation, because at the end of the day they can really thrive through the corporate ladder of social media and media content, whereas the left don't. That's why you do see more media censorship from the left. You just do. I mean, Novara Media's YouTube channel was deleted, not permanently, temporarily, a couple of years ago. That just doesn't happen. And finally, I'm going to be just, of course I'm going to say this. Someone who's not left wing will say, well, of course you're saying this because you're left wing, but it's just fucking true. The right wing lie more. They base everything on misinformation. I'm sorry, but they just do. Whether it comes to the British right or the American right, when it comes to the media, or when it comes to politicians, the right do fucking lie more. The left, of course we lie, or the left lie, and of course we get information wrong. The amount of propaganda from the right wing is insanely big. And as you covered in the second story, one of the biggest points from the right wing, and where they're winning the debate on immigration, study has shown that literally propaganda works, and that when it comes to sexual crimes, majority of people overblow it and seem to think that it comes from more migrants than it actually does come, in terms of the number of suspects and those who commit these crimes. Like, that's media propaganda and lies.
Can I just say that I think it comes from their lack of an analysis of power. Like, I think that's where a lot of this comes from. They don't have an analysis of power, so they have an inability to be able to see that they assume, because they haven't got that analysis of power, they sort of assume it's all team sports. And I think a lot of right-wing thinking is sort of kinetic, trying to look like you're doing stuff, and at the same time being team sports. So you've got to be doing more stuff than your opponent is basically the way that they think. And of course, they assume that the left is just as dishonest, just as backed by corporate interests as the right is, and it's not the case. But because they've got no analysis of power, they can't see that.
No. You make a valid point, actually. With the there's something else that I just wanted to say. It was with the left, of course, we're beholden to those capitalist platforms in order to say our piece. We don't have the big money backers, the billionaires who are capitalists, who are inherently right wing, who inherently have a vested interest in backing right wing narratives and promoting that propaganda. We are at we're at their mercy, in a sense. I mean, you've named several channels that have had problems recently and have been taken off, or Tide got his restored, fortunately. I don't know about the other ones that you mentioned there, but it is a constant worry in respect of the fact that any of us could be turned off in any given moment. And for what? For basically saying our piece and telling what we believe is the truth. Whenever we get something wrong, we issue corrections. That's a novelty for a lot of these mainstream media. And when they do issue a correction, it ends up buried somewhere in the middle pages in minuscule writing at the bottom of the column. Technically, they've done what they were asked to do, but of course they get away with doing that. There's no forcing them to do a big front page correction. Whereas if it was us, it would be a big splash sort of post on YouTube and the comment section and what have you else. The note, I got this wrong, please accept my apologies, la da da. It's happened to all of us once or twice, I should imagine. I'm certainly no different. But we're at the mercy of being completely cut off as a result of that. Regulation, such as it is, well, it's not, it's inherently, there's a right-wing bias built into what I keep on calling it regulation. It isn't that. What passes for regulation in the mainstream media is inherently right-wing, because it's right-wing dominated, and it's right-wing editors that are, by and large, doing the regulating. And so, of course, they just mark each other's homework, tick the box, say there, don't do it again, and off we go again and carry on. Nothing changes as a result of it, and yet you call them out on it. You go, oh, but I am regulated. You cannot say that about me. How dare you? And then there's a hoo-ha, and then possibly a court case or something like that. Because of course they've got the means to fight such things, and others don't, and so they win their case by default because it won't go challenged. It's a vicious cycle. The left is at a significant disadvantage in the bigger picture, and we know it.
I'm going to read out this comment because we've flirted with this comment for so long. Indefinite article, which alludes to the point you made, Damien. Media misinformation should be corrected in the same forum and with the same prominence that it was originally presented. This should be required. So I spoke about this in the last show, I believe, which is that you have these, especially print media, will put a front page splash of something that's clearly wrong, that Corbyn's a Czech spy or whatever, and the correction is on page 17 in a tiny little paragraph. Technically, they did their job, but that's not strong enough regulation, which again brings you back to Dan Neely when he's saying that it's strange that the left are calling for regulation or stronger regulation. Like, yeah, I think that the prominence of the lie should be equal to the prominence of the correction, if not more. Because ultimately, lots of media companies willfully lie and know they can pay any fine and they'll do the apology, because ultimately, if the lie is out there, that's what matters, right? If you have front pages of this particular lie and then you correct yourself on page 17, the lie is already out there. So, I mean, as Indefinite article says, that's the case. Jack and Jack H. It's funny how there's been a crackdown on articles about Gaza and protests against genocide, and yet right-wing journalists are perfectly free to hound a professor to his tragic death. And this is the thing, like, if we ever engage with like GB News, for example, Ben, and they like to talk about censorship. And to be fair to them, in one instance, they brought up the Canary debanking, but You never hear from the likes of GB News hosts on Twitter or wherever, or right wingers talk about the censorship when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to people who are just holding a sign. They don't even need to say anything, right? Talk about, oh, I'm being locked up for hurty words or whatever. It's not even words. You hold a sign that says, I support Palestine action. That can get you up to 14 years in jail. And I hear nothing from the right wing. So you can't take these people seriously when it comes to censorship when they won't even talk about that.
No, and you get.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ben. Go on.
I was just going to say that they, of course, they claim to be sort of free speech absolutists or near enough, and yet they decided on Palestine that actually that right shouldn't be extended to people who believe that bombing children, creating the largest, I think it's the largest number of child amputees anywhere on Earth. Should be, opposing that should be something that you shouldn't be allowed to do, is sort of the conclusion they've come to, which seems to me bizarre. These people who are supposedly free speech absolutists.
Yeah, I obviously on my channel I cover the Middle East almost exclusively these days. I did make an exception for Professor Arday today. I did coverage of that, especially in light of the green paper consultation that's still going through. The Starmer started about trustworthy media getting prioritized on YouTube and the like, which is just what we need as independent media who are actually regulated, of course. But it's one recurring comment I often get when I've covered someone about Israel or covered someone about Gaza is somebody coming along and saying, thank you for being brave. Thank you for being brave enough to actually talk about this when nobody else will. And I thought it always strikes me as weird because I'm talking about something that I can't get out of my head on a daily basis. That's why my channel's sort of skewed that way a bit. One day I might get back to other more, more UK based things perhaps, but I can't stand what I'm witnessing out there. And worse is the fact that people think it's brave to actually talk about it because people get shut down and turned off and switched off. And perhaps I am, I don't think I'm complacent about it. I mean, I realize it could happen to any channel at any time, especially ones that talk about stuff like I do, but I don't consider it bravery to talk about it. It's just basic journalism, isn't it? To tell the story, to report the news as it is and not what anybody else is telling. And it says a lot that there must be a lot of channels, a lot of outlets that have gone when people consider you still brave to actually talk about it instead of going silent on it. It's a worrying sort of thing, and I do dwell on it now and again, but it brought it to mind again.
It would be nice for Toby Young to speak up or speak out against the fact that there are many journalists in Gaza being slaughtered by Israel deliberately so they don't report on what's happening in the ground. Of course, Toby Young, who cares about journalism, hasn't said anything about that, interestingly. Flow Snake says, good to see Dama here again. I was actually building up to whinge about how long it had been. Well, looks like we got there just before you did, but still, it was too long.
I'm back on again in a couple of weeks. You're getting spoiled.
Getting spoiled now.
I was going to say, the Stasi, in East Germany, it was sort of a fairly convincing narrative, or to the people of East Germany, that the Stasi were always listening to you, that they were always right round the corner, and they had informants everywhere, and 50% of the population were Stasi informants. The reality is a very, very, very small number of East Germans were in the Stasi or were reporting to the Stasi, and the reason that I bring that up is you don't have to convince people that you're in order to silence people on Palestine. They don't have to come after every single instance of somebody speaking up for the Palestinians. They only have to target a few people, and then everybody else is looking over their shoulder and thinking, well, I've got a choice between covering Dale Vinson oil fields or this story about Palestine. I'm going to go with Dale Vinson oil fields. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that's what we did today. I'm just using that as an example. Like that's the sort of editorial decisions which small media outlets can make if they feel like their life is on the line. Sorry, going back a bit there.
Well, Michael Asker says in terms of Dale Vince, he should be promoting renewables and not endorsing this. What I find strange from Dale Vince in his defense of Rosebank and Jackdaw is that it feels like he's conflating two issues. He's saying that, oh, look, I'm relaxed now about this drilling because I care about oil. Sorry, bringing down prices. But to me, these are mutually exclusive. You can say I don't want any more drilling, but I support mechanisms, the pricing mechanisms, as you mentioned earlier. I forget the actual term for it, where the government agrees with a particular business.
Contract for
um
difference.
Contract for difference, there we go. That seems like a perfectly good place to start from. It's obviously not far enough, and of course, when it comes to government and big businesses negotiating, it's not always partisan because you've got government filled with lobbyists, right? So there is
Mhm.
obviously an issue there, but I'm not opposed to something like that. It's a start. But why does that have to coincide with, while I'm okay with more drilling? Um, I think it's really important, as someone who's very prominent, he is a prominent person, public figure, that someone stands strong and says, no, we shouldn't be doing this. Because ultimately, as we all agree, that changing society and power doesn't just reside in Westminster. Often changes happen outside of Westminster. And it would be so much more powerful if Dale Vince said, "No, no, no, look, I'm back in this Labour government, but we cannot drill more." And with his money and his influence, he started a new media company, Babelfish, I believe. He would have influence there, but instead he's capitulated on this because ultimately, in my personal view, I think he's towing the Labour line. Why did he not back Carla Denyer in Bristol? I get his overall argument. He wanted to see the end of the Tories. So I back Labour nationally, even though none of us voted Labour. But at least in a by-election in which Carla Denyer's polling was showing she was going to win, and she obviously did, um, he could have been like, "Well, it's good to have an extra Green person in Parliament." So that, to me, raises questions that he's more party partisan than he cares about the particular issue. I still cannot understand his logic that accepting more drilling, especially for 27 jobs in Jackdaw, means prices will go down when we could just implement those mechanisms anyway. And more broadly, we could renationalize oil. I know he's in favor of renationalizing water. I don't know what he said about renationalizing oil, but we could renationalize oil and then subsidize the inflated costs when it comes to like the Strait of Hormuz, for example. But also more broadly and long term, oil is a finite resource. It is going to become more scarce. Therefore, the price will ultimately go up, and we could transform our energy systems to renewables as quickly as possible to bring bills down. Imagine if we were just relying on wind and solar. I mean, it's an infinite resource that's never going to go away. Um, we literally could have almost free energy. The quicker we get to that means we can also have lower bills, and nationalisation is the temporary fix. I just do not understand, apart from being a Labour partisan, why he's like, yeah, no, I'm kind of relaxed about drilling
I mean,
because
he's.
because the licenses were in the manifesto. It's a cop out, if you ask me.
I mean, is he actually a Labour member?
I don't know if he's a member, but he's a
Yeah, if
Labour
he's a member,
donor.
I can kind of understand the whole Denyer side of things, but he's even if he was a Labour member, he's not an elected official, so there's no reason for him to go around flogging the Labour manifesto
Mm,
on such things. It's just a really weird position to take. But then you consider the fact, well, hang on, he owns this energy company, he's a capitalist as well.
yeah.
So maybe there's an interest there from a purely business perspective. But it flies in the face of everything he's supposedly about as an environmentalist. You can't square the 2 points. You're either an environmentalist or you're more worried about bringing down people's bills in relation to oil costs.
Mm.
And they just don't gel. There's no you can't square both those points. You can't put them both together. You're one
But
or the other in this case.
even as a capitalist, it doesn't make any sense because, as far as we're all aware, he doesn't have any investments in the oil industry. He owns Is it Eco? What's it called?
Ecotricity.
Ecotricity, right? He
Hmm.
owns, um, well, a clean energy firm. So it will be in his interest to get more government contracts, for example, than it would be to endorse oil drilling because that's not um business. That's not the area of his business he works in. So unless he actually has investments in oil, which would be a big expose if that were true, I doubt it. Then even from a capitalist point, I don't understand the logic.
Well,
sorry, I was going to say, oh, go on, Damien.
We keep trying to keep chipping in over each other. I do apologize, young man.
Mm.
The other point I was going to raise is how if I don't know, you buy your green electricity, for example. How do you know that electricity is definitely green electricity that's coming into your home? It all gets fed into the grid, regardless of how it's made and where it comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, you sort of you pay a green sort of tariff to basically invest more in renewables. So supposedly that's how it by and large works. But the actual electricity that comes into your house was generated by could be any number of different things. So I don't know whether necessarily there's a more sort of infrastructure based thinking around what he was saying there, perhaps. Maybe just sort of putting that out there.
I think he is thinking in incentive to some degree in incentive terms, but he's thinking in terms that are imminently reversible by any future government, and that's my problem with it. Is that a contract for difference is all very well if you've got a Labour government, but that only lasts you as long as the Labour government. It's not the kind of big overhaul systemic change that we need to see in order to place our tanks on reform's lawn, so to speak, and to make sure that we start the fight if we have to fight against a reform government. And I'm talking a metaphorical fight, a political fight here. That our metaphorical tanks are already parked on their lawn, and they have to take the fight from there. A position where the oil fields have already been closed down for a few years. It's going to be a massive cost if they want to reopen those oil fields, and companies will have to bear that cost. Also, there's so much money going into green energy that it's not worth reform opposing the thousands of wind farms that we've managed to set, or not thousands, maybe hundreds of, or maybe even tens of wind farms that you're able to set up, but just with thousands and thousands of wind turbines, or indeed. Damien mentioned it earlier, wave generation. Wave generation's come quite a long way in the last few years, as I understand it. It can be disrupting to marine life, but we're getting over those problems now. And I think there's so much to be said for those sorts of like big systemic changes that reform will struggle to reverse, rather than allowing reform to effectively just meet us in the middle, or even conceding to reform, conceding to people like Richard Tice, who, of course, would love to be able to just come in and just be able to scrap a contract and then everything's back to the way it was, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, it's 5 to 9. Just going to break this last comment because a super chat for Katie Marshall, £2. Leave Rosebank and Jackdaw the hell alone. Thank you for that super chat. And thank you so much. A really, really enjoyable show. Good to see you again, Damon.
Always a pleasure to be on here.
I'm going to hand back to you guys.
Awesome. No, thank you, Curtis, for doing those comments. Really appreciate it. And Damien, thank you for joining me. I am so glad that I think we've got you booked in a few weeks' time as well. And
I'm back on the 31st, I think, aren't I? So yes, looking forward to it already.
Let's go. I love that. And I love that you do like sort of your Middle East coverage much more on your channel now. So we almost get your exclusive domestic coverage. I love that.
Yeah. I said so. I sort of slipped by the wayside a little bit. It's not an intentional thing. It's just I can't get my head past what is still going on there, and the fact it's still getting worse and worse and worse. So now you're looking at Israel taking pot shots at Turkey now through Syria, and that could yet be like an 8th war front for them kicking off. It's a god almighty mess, and it's as fascinating as it is horrific, but it's also getting less and less coverage more generally. So I stick with it. And as hard and as harrowing as it can be, you can have a lot of fun with it when you do take the piss out of the likes of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, because let's face it, we can't do a lot about these people and ourselves in our own small ways. So the least we can do is ridicule them for the little pimples that they are. And that I can do. And I do take great pleasure in doing it too. So.
Indeed. And of course, where most people will know where they can find you. But what's the name of your channel? I know it.
It's Kerno Damo.
Kerno Damo.
Cornish for Cornwall. So yeah, Cornwall and Damo, and you get me.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Right, let us close out the show. Remember that we go live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7:30 p.m. You have been watching Normal Island. Thank you very much and good night.